What if a simple melody, the kind most people would dismiss as background noise, could rip away the facade of a seemingly ordinary customer and expose a web of lies stretching back 20 years? Shayla Morgan never expected anything unusual during her Wednesday afternoon shift at Magnolia Diner, juggling too many tables for too little pay, while her phone occasionally buzzed with calls from the daycare about her sick daughter. But when her distinctive ringtone echoed through the busy restaurant, she noticed something impossible. The well-dressed man in booth 7 physically recoiled, his face draining of color before he threw cash on the table and fled into the parking lot. That 3-second musical sequence wasn't random. It was a breadcrumb, leading to buried secrets, forgotten promises, and a connection that would transform her struggling single-mother existence forever. Shayla Morgan wiped down the sticky laminate counter of Magnolia Diner for what felt like the 1,000th time that evening, her fingertips pruned from sanitizer solution and her mind still spinning with questions about the man in booth 7. The fluorescent lights above flickered in rhythm, with the first drops of rain tapping against the streaked windows, casting uncertain shadows across the checkered floor tiles worn thin from 4 decades of service. Manager Rick loomed over her shoulder, his coffee breath assaulting her senses as he launched into another tired lecture about keeping personal phones silenced during shifts, completely oblivious to the fact that Zoe had been running a fever at daycare all afternoon. His words dissolved into background noise alongside the clinking of cheap silverware and the sizzle of the flat-top grill as Shayla methodically counted out her tips for the day, $23.45. Barely enough for the medicine her daughter needed, let alone making a dent in the past-due electric bill waiting at home. Tricia sidled up beside her, smelling of cigarettes and the vanilla body spray she applied too liberally between tables, her acrylic nails clicking against the counter as she slid a crisp $100 bill toward Shayla with wide eyes and a conspiratorial whisper. The well-dressed man who bolted at the sound of her ringtone had apparently thrown it down before rushing out, leaving behind half a club sandwich and a full cup of coffee still steaming on the table. Shayla stared at the money, Benjamin Franklin gazing back at her with the same look of judgment she imagined on the face of the fleeing customer. But why would someone leave such an excessive tip only to run away as if being hunted? The rain outside intensified, now drumming against the diner roof in earnest, mirroring the quickening tempo of questions pounding through her mind. What about her grandmother's music box melody could possibly strike such terror in a stranger wearing a watch that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent? Around her, the evening crowd thinned as the storm grew stronger, leaving behind coffee-stained mugs and plates smeared with ketchup remnants that awaited her attention before clock out. Shayla tucked the $100 bill into her apron pocket, its weight feeling somehow both miraculous and dangerous against her thigh as she mechanically stacked dishes and wiped down vacant tables. The last booth by the window sat empty now, nothing but a water ring on the table and the lingering scent of expensive cologne marking where he had been just an hour before. Through the rain-blurred glass, the parking lot lights created hazy halos in the darkness, illuminating nothing but wet asphalt where his sleek black sedan had been parked. Something about his eyes in that moment of recognition, the flicker of panic, the momentary freeze before flight, suggested this wasn't simply about avoiding an awkward conversation or ducking out on a bill. Whatever connection existed between her ringtone and that stranger went deeper than coincidence, stirring something primal enough to make a man who exuded power and control abandon all pretense of normalcy in a public place. As Shayla punched her time card and pushed through the squeaking back door into the rain, she clutched her phone tightly, suddenly seeing the inherited melody as something more consequential than a sentimental reminder of her grandmother. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The key turned reluctantly in the weathered lock of apartment 412 as Shayla balanced a pharmacy bag in one hand and her purse in the other, the $100 bill now converted into children's, fever, reducer, and the luxury of a taxi ride home through the thunderstorm. Inside, Mrs. Jenkins from next door dozed on the sagging couch, her grey head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle while cartoon characters danced silently on the television screen. Zoe lay curled under a patchwork quilt their grandmother had made years ago, her small face flushed with fever against the faded fabric, dark curls plastered to her forehead with sweat. The babysitter startled awake at the sound of the door, apologizing about the fever spike as Shayla pressed cool lips to her daughter's burning forehead and whispered reassurances that everything would be okay, though the stack of envelopes marked final notice on the kitchen table suggested otherwise. Red disconnection warnings and payment plan offers created a topography of financial distress beneath the glow of the single overhead bulb with its missing glass shade, yet the walls around them told a different story. Crayon drawings carefully preserved in dollar store frames, school achievement certificates proudly displayed, photographs of mother and daughter with matching gap-toothed smiles arranged in loving constellation. Shayla measured out the correct dose of medicine with practiced precision, coaxing it between Zoe's reluctant lips while simultaneously kicking off her waitress shoes and calculating how many extra shifts she would need to cover both the electric bill and this month's always late rent payment. When her phone suddenly played the distinctive music box melody, those haunting 12 notes that had belonged to her grandmother before becoming her own personal ringtone, Shayla nearly dropped the medicine bottle, remembering with visceral clarity how that same sequence had transformed a stranger's face from polite detachment to raw panic just hours earlier. She fumbled for the phone with sticky fingers, expecting perhaps the diner calling about a forgotten task or the health clinic following up on Zoe's persistent cough, but the screen displayed only unknown caller in stark digital letters. "Hello," she whispered, conscious of her daughter's fitful sleep just feet away. But only silence answered her, the particular quality of silence that meant someone was there, breathing, listening, but unwilling to speak. After 30 seconds of this wordless connection, the call ended abruptly, leaving Shayla staring at her phone as if it might suddenly explain itself. Outside her window, the city lights created muted patterns through the rain-streaked glass, cars swishing through puddles on the street below, the ordinary nighttime symphony continuing without acknowledgement of how her world felt suddenly tilted on its axis. Mrs. Jenkins gathered her things and accepted the worn $20 bill. Shayla insisted she take despite protests, leaving mother and daughter alone in the small apartment with its mismatched furniture collected from second-hand stores and curb alerts. Shayla slipped the phone under her pillow before curling protectively around Zoe in their shared bed, listening to the rattle in her daughter's breathing while wondering what invisible thread connected an expensive suit in booth 7 to her grandmother's music box to a silent caller who somehow knew to reach out on this particular stormy night. The coincidences felt too precise, too intentional to dismiss, yet she had no framework for understanding what they might mean or how they connected to her life of double shifts and discount, grocery shopping, and falling asleep each night, calculating which bill could wait another week without causing catastrophe. She pulled Zoe closer, the only truly valuable thing in her universe, and tried to ignore the strange sensation that somewhere across the rain-soaked city, someone knew far more about Shayla Morgan than she knew about herself. Morning light strained weakly through rain clouds as Shayla trudged toward Magnolia Diner, her sneakers squelching through puddles while Zoe recovered with a neighbor friend whose daughter attended the same underfunded kindergarten. The gleaming black Bentley seemed impossibly out of place against the cracked concrete and faded signage of the diner parking lot, like a swan floating in a drainage ditch, its presence so anomalous that Shayla initially walked past before doubling back with narrowed eyes. Through tinted windows nearly black as oil, she glimpsed the silhouette of someone waiting inside, triggering an instinctive caution that made her fingers tighten around her keychain pepper spray. before the rear door swung open with mechanical precision. The woman who emerged moved with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to being watched. Silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon that framed a face lined with years, yet somehow timeless. Her cashmere coat, probably worth more than every item in Shayla's closet combined. Rick intercepted Shayla at the employee entrance, his typical morning scowl replaced by an unsettling civility as he explained that Mrs. Eleanor Reed had specifically requested Shayla's section and would be waiting whenever she finished changing into her uniform. The morning rush swirled around booth 7 with its single occupant. Pancake orders shouted over the sizzle of bacon and coffee mugs refilled with assembly line efficiency, while Shayla approached with wary professionalism, notepad poised and smile fixed. Mrs. Reed ordered only black coffee and toast, her attention focused on Shayla with an intensity that seemed simultaneously intrusive and familiar, asking questions that slipped past pleasantries into unexpected territory about her grandmother Victoria, about growing up in Millfield County, about the music box melody Shayla kept as her ringtone. Each question pierced through the ambient clatter of the diner with surgical precision, leaving Shayla increasingly unsteady as she balanced plates for other tables, while struggling to understand how this stranger knew such specific details about her life. When her phone chimed from her apron pocket during a particularly busy moment, Mrs. Reed froze mid-sentence, her perfectly manicured hand suddenly gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles before she recovered her composure, with a smoothness that suggested years of practice concealing emotional reactions. The morning stretched into afternoon as Eleanor lingered over numerous coffee refills, observing Shayla with the focused attention of someone studying a long-lost text while other customers cycled through their hurried breakfasts and lunch specials. When Shayla finally delivered the check for what amounted to less than $20, Eleanor placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the table, alongside a heavy cream business card, embossed with gold lettering that caught the fluorescent light. Eleanor Reed, Executive Director, Reed Family Foundation. Shayla stammered about being unable to make change for such a large amount. But Eleanor simply folded Shayla's fingers around both the money and card, with a touch that felt cool yet somehow burning with significance. "Our family owes much to yours," she said cryptically, holding eye contact for 3 heartbeats longer than comfortable before sweeping toward the door with regal posture, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and questions multiplying in her wake. Through the window, Shayla watched as the uniformed driver held an umbrella over Eleanor, before closing her door with practiced deference, the Bentley pulling away from Magnolia Diner, like a ship departing mundane shores for deeper waters. Tricia appeared at her elbow, wide-eyed at the tip amount, while Rick suddenly materialized to ask about their important customer, but Shayla barely registered their voices as she turned the heavy business card over in her hand, wondering what possible debt the visibly wealthy Reed family could owe to a single mother surviving on tips and overtime in a world seemingly galaxies removed from Eleanor Reed's cashmere reality. Zoe finally succumbed to sleep at 9:30, her fever broken but leaving behind the bone-deep exhaustion that follows illness, allowing Shayla to unfold her ancient laptop at the kitchen table where its fan wheezed asthmatically against the silence of their apartment. The Reed Family Foundation website loaded with glacial slowness over her borrowed-from-the-neighbor Wi-Fi, revealing images of gleaming corporate buildings and charity galas populated by faces wearing the particular smile of the comfortably wealthy. Scrolling revealed Eleanor Reed front and center in every major photograph, her silver hair and patrician features unmistakable alongside mentions of billions in assets and philanthropic initiatives spanning 4 decades. Shayla leaned closer to the screen as company holdings unfurled before her eyes. 37 restaurants, including Magnolia Diner, acquired last year, 14 apartment complexes, including the rundown building where she currently sat, medical facilities, shopping centers, and educational endowments spreading across the city like an invisible web connecting seemingly disparate parts of her daily existence. A notification popped onto her screen, a breaking news alert about financial irregularities at the Reed Foundation, with accusations of embezzlement and tax fraud focusing on Gregory Reed, Eleanor's son and company executive. The accompanying photograph struck Shayla with physical force, coffee sloshing over her mug rim onto the table as she recognized the man from Booth 7, his panic now contextualized by potential criminal charges. She clicked through related articles with increasingly unsteady hands, finding archived society pages showing Gregory at various functions over the years, but one image from 27 years ago stopped her scrolling completely. A younger Gregory Reed standing beside an elegantly dressed woman who could only be Eleanor, both smiling stiffly at a charity auction, while in the background, partially blurred but unmistakable to Shayla's eyes, stood her grandmother Victoria wearing a uniform suggesting household staff rather than guest. Another archive photo showed Victoria more clearly, standing behind the Reed family in what appeared to be their home, holding what looked like an infant, while the caption noted only, "Reed family with household staff at summer residence, 1989. The music box, her grandmother's most prized possession, allegedly discovered at a Paris antique market, suddenly seemed connected to these people in ways Shayla couldn't fully comprehend, its melody somehow significant enough to send Gregory Reed fleeing from the diner. When her ringtone suddenly played, Shayla jumped violently enough to knock her chair backwards. But again, the call showed unknown caller and delivered only silence before disconnecting after exactly 30 seconds. Drawn by some instinct she couldn't name, Shayla moved to the window overlooking the street below, pushing aside the thin curtain to reveal the gleaming black Bentley parked directly across from her building, its engine running despite the late hour, interior too dark to discern any occupants watching her third-floor apartment. She let the curtain fall back into place with fingers suddenly cold despite the apartment's perpetually inadequate heating, her mind racing through incomprehensible connections. Her grandmother's music box melody, the Reed family's wealth, Gregory's crimes, Eleanor's strange comment about debts owed, and now surveillance outside her home. Whatever ordinary life Shayla had been living seemed to disintegrate around her, revealing strange architecture underneath connections and histories she had never suspected flowing beneath the surface of her daily struggles. She clutched the business card Eleanor had given her, its weight and texture signaling entrance to another world, while outside, the Bentley's headlights suddenly illuminated before it pulled smoothly away from the curb, disappearing around the corner like a shark returning to deeper waters after circling potential prey. The Reed Foundation headquarters occupied the top 8 floors of a glass and steel tower downtown, its lobby populated by security guards with earpieces and receptionists whose perfect smiles never quite reached their eyes. Shayla felt profoundly out of place in her best interview outfit purchased 3 years ago from a clearance rack, clutching her imitation leather purse, while being escorted by a silent assistant through security checkpoints toward a private elevator requiring keycard access. The ascent to the 40th floor happened with such frictionless speed that her stomach lurched uncomfortably, doors opening to reveal a reception area overlooking the entire city through floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun transforming the urban landscape into a glittering tapestry below. Eleanor waited in an office larger than Shayla's entire apartment, its minimalist design of glass and chrome softened only by an abundance of family photographs covering one-wall generations of Reeds, captured in formal portraits and candid moments, wealth and privilege, documented across decades of carefully curated imagery. The older woman gestured toward an artfully arranged sitting area where coffee service awaited on a low table, steam rising from porcelain cups, thin enough to be translucent in the morning light. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the particular timbre of someone accustomed to having their words carefully considered by others. "What you must understand about my son Gregory is that, biologically, he is not my son at all." Shayla nearly spilled her coffee as Eleanor explained with clinical detachment how Gregory had been abandoned as an infant, discovered by their groundskeeper, and subsequently adopted by the Reeds after their own tremendous loss. a daughter given up decades earlier, when Eleanor and her husband Charles were struggling college students without family support or financial resources. The pregnancy had been unplanned, the adoption closed and legally binding, the regret immediate and devastating as Charles threw himself into building what would become the Reed Empire, while Eleanor descended into years of depression until Gregory's unexpected arrival seemed to offer redemption. The music box melody that served as Shayla's ringtone, Eleanor continued with visible emotion finally cracking her composed exterior, was originally composed by Charles for their infant daughter, played each night before they surrendered her to social services. Her husband had commissioned a single music box containing the melody, which disappeared along with their daughter, its existence now inexplicably connected to Shayla through her grandmother Victoria, who Eleanor confirmed had indeed worked as their nanny following the adoption of Gregory. Shayla's mind struggled to process implications expanding before her like the city vista beyond the windows, connections forming with terrible clarity. Her grandmother raising her with the distinctive music box while working for a family who had surrendered a daughter, the timing aligning perfectly with Shayla's birth year, her own mother's vague explanations about being adopted by Victoria after a tragic accident claimed her biological parents. Eleanor produced a small velvet box containing a key that unlocked the original composition notes in Charles' handwriting, alongside a faded photograph showing Eleanor and Charles as young parents holding a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket remarkably similar to one Shayla had kept among her grandmother's possessions. "Your DNA test would confirm what I already suspect," Eleanor said quietly, her perfect composure now visibly fractured by emotion. "But I recognized you immediately. You have your father's eyes and my mother's cheekbones." The city continued its business 40 floors below, oblivious to the seismic revelation happening above as Shayla stared at her own reflection in the window glass, suddenly seeing features that matched the woman sitting across from her genetic echoes, spanning decades and social divides. All her life struggling against poverty while inheritance and privilege had awaited unknowing, all her questions about identity potentially answered in this cold chrome office, surrounded by the family history that might actually be her own. Eleanor reached across the pristine coffee table with uncharacteristic hesitation, her manicured hand hovering just above Shayla's trembling fingers. Two women separated by 40 years and billions of dollars, yet possibly connected by the most fundamental human bond. While outside the office door, urgent voices approached, discussing Gregory Reed's escalating legal troubles. The rainstorm unleashed itself with biblical fury as Shayla's shift ended, transforming the parking lot into a shallow lake reflecting fractured neon from the diner sign above. She hesitated beneath the dubious shelter of the awning, contemplating the futility of her thin jacket against such determined precipitation, when lightning illuminated a figure leaning against her rust-pocked sedan 20 yards away. Recognition prickled her spine before conscious thought could name him. Gregory Reed stood waiting, his expensive suit incongruous beneath a large black umbrella, face partially shadowed, yet unmistakably focused on her, with the predatory stillness of someone who has selected their quarry. Shayla considered retreating inside, but pride propelled her forward instead. Chin lifted as rain immediately soaked through her uniform and plastered her hair against her scalp within seconds. "I see you've found your way into my mother's good graces quite efficiently," Gregory called over the downpour, his voice carrying the particular inflection of expensive schools and inherited confidence. "The con is impressive, the struggling single mother routine, the convenient music box connection, the remarkable facial resemblance you somehow engineered." His accusations crashed against her like physical blows, suggesting calculation where only confusion existed, painting her as manipulator rather than bewildered participant in whatever drama was unfolding between them. Shayla attempted to push past toward her car, but his hand shot out, fingers circling her wrist with uncomfortable pressure while maintaining perfect composure beneath his shelter. "I invested 27 years becoming the sole heir to the Reed fortune," he continued, rain cascading from his umbrella onto her already drenched shoulders, creating a family legacy from absolutely nothing while Eleanor retreated into regret and delusion about her long-lost baby. Through the diner windows, Shayla glimpsed co-workers watching with concerned expressions, Trisha already reaching for her phone, while Rick moved toward the door with uncharacteristic protective intent. Whatever Eleanor told you about DNA and family connections is the desperate fantasy of an aging woman with more guilt than sense, Gregory hissed, leaning close enough for Shayla to smell expensive cologne beneath the petrichor. I control 47% of Foundation assets already, with full voting rights whenever Eleanor becomes mentally incapacitated, a condition her personal physician is increasingly concerned about documenting. His smile appeared genuine despite eyes remaining coldly calculating, a practiced expression likely reserved for business competitors before their destruction. Pursue this further and everything you care about disappears: your job, your apartment, your daughters, school placement, possibly even custody itself, given your financial instability and questionable decision-making. Thunder punctuated his threat, while lightning briefly illuminated the parking lot, revealing Rick now standing in the open doorway, observing their interaction. Gregory released her wrist with deliberate slowness, adjusting his already perfect cuffs, before stepping back with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to frightening others into submission. Eleanor's capacity for self-deception is matched only by her sentimentality, both weaknesses I lack entirely. Consider carefully whether you want me as an enemy when I already own the building where you sleep and the business where you work. He turned with military precision and walked toward a waiting town car, umbrella perfectly steady despite wind gusting around them. Shayla remained rooted in place as both vehicles disappeared into the stormy night, rain mingling with unexpected tears while she attempted to reconcile two vastly different narratives. Eleanor's emotional revelation suggesting family versus Gregory's cold accusation suggesting calculated deception. Behind her, the diner continued its evening business, plates clattering and coffee brewing in mundane rhythm, while her entire understanding of identity and connection lay shattered around her feet, like the puddles reflecting broken light from above. Rick appeared beside her with an unexpected offer of his own umbrella and a gruffly concerned inquiry about that guy bothering you, creating the strange sensation of finding protection from an unexpected source, while threats emerged from what might be her own family tree. The power failed across 6 city blocks that night, transforming Shayla's apartment into a cave of shadows punctuated by emergency candles scavenged from kitchen drawers and bathroom cabinets. Zoe slept peacefully for once, her breathing finally clear after weeks of persistent cough, allowing Shayla precious solitude to wrestle with questions multiplying like the dancing shadows on her walls. She dragged the weathered trunk from beneath her bed, her grandmother's final bequest containing personal items deemed too precious for casual storage but too private for display. The ancient brass lock yielded to the small key Shayla kept on her necklace, revealing layered contents preserved through decades. Faded photographs, birth certificates, graduation announcements, and beneath them all, a collection of leather-bound journals arranged by date spanning 37 years of her grandmother's life. The earliest journal fell open with the familiarity of pages frequently revisited, its entries beginning shortly after Victoria secured employment with the Reed family as nanny to their newborn daughter Eliza Reed in 1988. Candle flames wavered as Shayla discovered her grandmother documenting with growing concern how Charles Reed changed following unexpected business success, transforming from devoted father to absent provider consumed by empire building, while Eleanor struggled with postpartum depression. Victoria described with aching detail how she became the primary caregiver to baby Eliza, witnessing the increasingly fractured family dynamic, as Charles insisted the child compromised their newfound social standing, an inconvenient reminder of their formerly impoverished circumstances. The journal entries grew increasingly desperate as Victoria documented Charles' plans to send the baby to distant relatives despite Eleanor's emotional objections, culminating in Victoria overhearing a terrible argument where Charles threatened to have Eleanor institutionalized if she continued fighting his decision. The handwriting changed on one crucial page, becoming jagged with emotion as Victoria described her unthinkable choice, taking baby Eliza during her scheduled day off, leaving no forwarding address, effectively disappearing with the child she had come to love as her own while Eleanor remained hospitalized for nervous exhaustion. Lightning flashed outside the apartment windows as Shayla read her grandmother's confession through tears. Understanding now how Victoria Miller became a single mother to a child suddenly renamed Shayla's mother, relocating across the country, before eventually returning years later, when recognition seemed impossible. The most devastating revelation waited in the final pages. Victoria had maintained secret communication with Eleanor throughout those years, sending photographs and updates through a lawyer sworn to confidentiality, allowing Eleanor to witness her daughter's growth from afar, without risking Charles discovering their whereabouts. The music box had indeed been commissioned by Charles as a lullaby for baby Eliza, but it was Eleanor who secretly arranged its delivery to Victoria years later as tangible connection between mother and child, the melody becoming the soundtrack to Shayla's own childhood through her grandmother's deliberate preservation of this fragile link between worlds. Thunder rattled the windows as Shayla processed implications cascading through generations, her grandmother, both savior and kidnapper, Eleanor, both victim and accomplice, her own mother raised in loving deception, and herself, the biological granddaughter of wealth, built partly on her absence. The final journal entry, dated just weeks before Victoria's death, contained a sealed letter addressed to Shayla, with instructions to open only if the reeds ever made contact, suggesting Victoria always knew this day might come when past actions would demand accountability. Rain continued its relentless percussion against the windows as Shayla carefully broke the seal, candle flames illuminating her grandmother's final confession and explanation written specifically for this moment of revelation, while across the city, two households with competing claims to her existence weathered the same storm from vastly different vantage points. Gregory secured in luxury, plotting her removal, Eleanor surrounded by wealth built upon decades of secret heartache, and Shayla caught between inherited complications with nothing but candlelight and painful truth to guide her forward. The medical complex housing Ascendant Genetics occupied half a city block, its sterile corridors and antiseptic scent, creating the particular anonymity of spaces designed for processing human bodies rather than nurturing human spirits. Shayla sat rigidly in an uncomfortable plastic chair beside Eleanor, both women staring fixedly at the wall-mounted screen where Dr. Abernathy manipulated complex genetic maps with practiced gestures, explaining maternal DNA markers and chromosome patterns with clinical precision that failed entirely to acknowledge the emotional earthquake their confirmation represented. The results are conclusive beyond any statistical doubt, the doctor concluded, indicating overlapping sequences highlighted in fluorescent green against the black background. Eleanor Reed is your biological mother, with 99.97% certainty. The words hung in the temperature-controlled air between them. Scientific validation of a connection formed 37 years earlier and preserved through extraordinary circumstances neither woman had controlled. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand found Shayla's calloused fingers across the chair divide, their first physical contact as acknowledged mother and daughter, occurring beneath harsh fluorescent lights, while surrounded by genome sequencing results rather than in the emotional reunion either might have imagined. Shayla scarcely processed the doctor's continuing explanation of genetic inheritance patterns, her mind instead cataloguing the strange sensation of looking at Eleanor and recognizing her own features matured by 4 additional decades, the particular arch of eyebrows, the identical curve connecting ear to jawline, genetic echoes traveling through time, despite vastly different life circumstances shaping their expressions. Outside in the medical center parking garage, Eleanor insisted Shayla drive her personal vehicle rather than the chauffeured Bentley, explaining with newfound urgency that recent events suggested Gregory had compromised her regular security team. Inside the luxury car worth more than Shayla's lifetime earnings, Eleanor produced a sealed manila envelope containing financial records illuminating the true nature of accusations against the foundation. Elaborate transactions meticulously constructed to appear authorized by Eleanor while actually funneling millions into offshore accounts controlled by Gregory, documented evidence of her adopted son systematically looting the foundation while constructing a paper trail suggesting Eleanor's mental deterioration and financial irresponsibility. The embezzlement stretched back 7 years but accelerated dramatically following Gregory's accidental discovery of Eleanor's secret correspondence about her biological daughter, revealing his recent efforts as desperate attempts to secure control before his replacement in the family hierarchy could be legally established. Rain began again as Eleanor explained how just yesterday her personal attorney had filed emergency injunctions freezing foundation assets based on evidence they now held, temporarily halting Gregory's access while formal investigations preceded actions that had undoubtedly accelerated his threatening confrontation with Shayla at the diner. The medical building's flawless glass facade reflected their departure in perfect clarity. 2 women connected by blood, yet separated by lifetime experiences navigating toward reconciliation through shared danger. While across town, Gregory likely discovered his financial maneuvers suddenly blocked with no explanation. Eleanor continued explaining the complexity of trust structures and inheritance provisions that her late husband Charles had established before his death 15 years prior, provisions specifically designating their biological child as primary beneficiary, regardless of adoption status, legal frameworks that Gregory had discovered and recognized as existential threat to his position. These revelations crystallized previously disconnected elements into coherent narrative, the music box melody triggering Gregory's panic upon recognizing its significance, Eleanor seeking confirmation of suspicions maintained for decades, silent phone calls as Gregory conducted surveillance, and Victoria's extraordinary choice preserving connection through generations despite separation. Shayla absorbed these complexities while driving through increasingly heavy rain, witnessing her own transformation from struggling single mother to authenticated Reed heir within the span of 72 hours, genetic reality confirmed through science while financial truth emerged through documentation. But her thoughts remained primarily with Zoe waiting at her friend's apartment, contemplating how to explain to a 6-year-old that her family tree had suddenly expanded to include both immense wealth and imminent danger. Their modest life about to undergo metamorphosis, neither had anticipated when Gregory Reed first fled Booth 7, at the sound of 12 notes, arranged in sequence 37 years earlier, by the grandfather Shayla would never meet. The annual Reed Foundation Benefactors Gala transformed the Grand Kensington Hotel ballroom into a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers suspending constellations of light above 300 of the most influential individuals in the city, arranged like devotees around linen-covered tables worth more than Shayla's annual income. Eleanor insisted her attendance was non-negotiable despite security concerns, presenting Shayla with a gown of midnight blue silk that fit with suspicious perfection, suggesting measurements taken without her knowledge at some point during their unfolding connection. Entering that rarefied atmosphere on Eleanor's arm created immediate ripples through the assembly. Speculation blossoming visibly across faces arranged in expressions of polite interest, barely concealing ravenous curiosity about the unknown. Woman accompanying the famously private Eleanor Reed. Gregory stood at the central podium, delivering remarks about foundation accomplishments with practiced charm, his sentence faltering mid-word upon noticing their entrance before recovery. So smooth, only those specifically watching for reaction would notice the momentary fracture in his performance. Eleanor guided Shayla through social introductions with strategic precision, each conversation piece revealing another portion of her identity to specific board members and financial officers, creating and expanding awareness of her existence among exactly those with power to influence foundation governance. The calculated nature of this public unveiling became apparent as Eleanor timed their approach to the podium precisely as Gregory concluded his address, effectively trapping him in place. As Foundation Counsel Philip Abernathy simultaneously appeared with a leather portfolio containing documented evidence of financial malfeasance. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Eleanor announced with voice carrying effortlessly across suddenly hushed conversations, "I present to you my biological daughter, Eliza Reed, known as Shayla Morgan, whose identity has been confirmed through comprehensive genetic testing." Gregory lunged for the microphone, but security personnel materialized with remarkable coordination, their dark suits and earpieces suggesting preparation for exactly this confrontation, as Abernathy opened his portfolio directly in front of keyboard members. The evidence of systematic embezzlement lay exposed beneath spotlights like actors on stage account transfers, forged authorizations, falsified competency evaluations, and surveillance reports tracking Shayla for years before their official meeting. "You knew she existed," Eleanor continued with controlled fury, directed at Gregory, visible now to hundreds of witnesses. "You discovered my private correspondence 7 years ago during your unauthorized access of personal files, then deliberately kept us apart while systematically looting the foundation established by your adoptive father." Trapped between security personnel and damning documentation, Gregory abandoned pretense with startling abruptness, his handsome features contorting with rage as he addressed the assembled power brokers of the city. "She abandoned me first," he spat toward Eleanor with decades of accumulated bitterness. "I was nothing but replacement therapy for your precious lost baby. A convenient prop while Charles built his empire using my intelligence and loyalty, while you pined for this waitress." The ballroom remained in shocked silence as Gregory continued his unplanned confession, admitting to discovering Eleanor's secret correspondence years earlier and using private investigators to locate Shayla, monitoring her existence from afar while ensuring Eleanor never discovered her proximity. When Charles died, the fool left everything structured around biological succession. Gregory continued with increasing desperation, his public self-immolation witnessed by precisely those whose respect he had cultivated for decades. "Everything I built would transfer automatically to some stranger who never contributed anything to this family legacy." His attempt to lunge toward Shayla prompted immediate restraint from security personnel, now joined by uniformed police officers entering through service doors. The Foundation Counsel calmly informing Gregory that financial crimes investigators awaited his statement regarding specific transactions now displayed on ballroom screens. Eleanor stepped forward into the vacuum Gregory's removal created, wrapping protective arms around Shayla with maternal fierceness visible to everyone present, their physical resemblance now obvious when framed by identical posture and emotional resonance despite vastly different life experiences. This moment represented threshold crossing impossible to reverse public acknowledgement of blood connection, documented evidence of criminal conspiracy, witnessed confrontation, establishing moral alignment for hundreds of influential observers who would carry this story throughout the city within hours. Cameras flashed as mother and daughter stood framed against the backdrop of wealth built partly during their separation, Eleanor turning toward the assembled crowd with composed dignity, while maintaining protective contact with Shayla throughout her address regarding foundation reorganization plans and leadership transition already approved by emergency board action earlier that day. The gala continued with surreal normalcy around this extraordinary revelation, attendees pivoting smoothly from shock to calculated assessment of new power dynamics, while waitstaff circulated with champagne flutes among suddenly reformed conversational groups, reorganizing themselves based on demonstrated loyalty to either Gregory or Eleanor throughout preceding years. Sunlight streamed through newly installed windows of Magnolia Diner, transformed from flickering fluorescent cave into light-filled community space while maintaining its original character, the vintage countertops restored rather than replaced, the classic signage refurbished rather than redesigned. the soul of the place preserved despite its comprehensive renewal. Shayla occupied booth 7 with practiced ease, reviewing application materials spread across the table while occasionally glancing toward the corner play area where Eleanor sat cross-legged on colorful floor cushions, helping Zoe and 3 other children construct an elaborate block tower with the focused concentration of conspirators sharing important secrets. Waiting across the table, Maria Rodriguez clutched her coffee mug with white-knuckled intensity, the particular tension of someone simultaneously desperate and proud. A single mother of twin 4-year-olds working 3 part-time jobs while attending community college night classes, exactly the candidate profile the Eliza Project had been established to support. The Reed Foundation's single-parent initiative represented Shayla's first major program implementation following her legal recognition as Eleanor's daughter and board appointment, combining housing subsidies with educational scholarships and childcare accessibility to address the interconnected challenges she understood from lived experience rather than theoretical philanthropy. 12 program participants currently occupied renovated apartments above the diner with on-site childcare available during working hours, removing precisely the barriers that had once kept Shayla trapped in cycles of perpetual struggle despite her best efforts. "These walls know exactly what you're feeling right now," Shayla told Maria with genuine understanding impossible to counterfeit, having carried the same burden of responsibility, exhaustion, pride, and determination visible in the younger woman's carefully maintained appearance, assembled from thrift store finds and discount retailers. 6 booths down, Tricia now managed daily diner operations with surprising organizational skill previously untapped during years of minimum wage service. Her cigarette breaks replaced by business development meetings with local suppliers as the establishment evolved into job training facility and community gathering space without sacrificing its identity as neighborhood institution. Eleanor laughed with unexpected abandon as Zoe's block tower reached ambitious height before collapsing dramatically, her formerly perfect coiffure slightly disheveled from floor-level play, while cashmere and silk had gradually given way to more practical attire for grandmother duties enthusiastically embraced after decades of emptiness. From her apron pocket, Shayla withdrew the antique music box restored by expert craftsmen to its original condition, its melody now understood as tangible connection, spanning generations and circumstances. She wound the delicate mechanism before passing it to Maria, whose tired eyes widened at its obvious value and incongruity with the practical interview process, discussing scholarship applications and housing availability. 12 notes filled the sunlit space, carrying emotional weight beyond their simple arrangement, while creating brief conversational pause throughout the diner, as regular customers recognized the significance of this ritual witnessed previously with other program candidates. That melody once represented impossible distance between worlds, Shayla explained, as the final notes faded into comfortable silence. Now it reminds us how unexpectedly lives can intertwine and transform through simple recognition of shared humanity. The Reed Foundation financial resources now under joint stewardship between mother and daughter following Gregory's criminal conviction had enabled systematic change rather than merely symbolic charity, addressing structural inequalities through programs designed by someone intimately familiar with exactly which support mechanisms created genuine opportunity versus performative assistance. Maria's application joined 12 others already approved for the program's second cohort, scheduled to begin the following month, creating sustainable pathway from daily survival to potential prosperity through practical interventions at precisely the leverage points Shayla had once desperately needed herself. Outside through spotless windows, the neighborhood showed subtle signs of revitalization without displacement. Small businesses receiving foundation, microgrants, community services expanding accessibility, housing renovated without corresponding rent increases through innovative ownership structures Shayla had personally championed against initial board resistance. Eleanor rose from the play area with 7-year-old assistance, her transformation from isolated wealth to engaged grandmother mirroring Shayla's journey from struggling waitress to foundation executive. Both women fundamentally changed through connection. Neither had anticipated when a ringtone played in Booth 7 exactly 4 seasons earlier. Their shared work continued with purpose beyond personal reconciliation, expanding outward to create systems addressing precisely the circumstances that had originally separated them: financial vulnerability, inadequate support for young parents, and economic barriers preventing potential from becoming opportunity. The antique music box now rested in Maria's trembling hands, temporarily connecting her to generational stories still unfolding through lives touched by its melody. While throughout the sunlit diner, dozens of individuals pursued their own transformations through programs designed by someone intimately familiar with both struggle and possibility. The distance between worlds bridged through recognition that every story contains unexpected connections waiting to be discovered.